So camshaft deviations are basically defined as the delta or difference between the positioning of each bank's camshafts and the crankshaft. The crankshaft will always set your standard for where the engine is in all of the crankshaft position events. Everything from the crankshaft is then measured in a delta of either negative, or valve train retard, or positive and valve train advance. So this video is going to focus on the Porsche M9X family of engines starting in 1997 and going clear through the end of their production in 2008. It is not going to cover 9-alpha 1 engines beginning in 2009 with the MA101, MA102 derivatives. Those engines have a different set of components, a different set of rules, and they are completely different in every way from that of these particular 5-chain and 3-chain Porsche engines that retained the intermediate shaft as part of their physical design. So through the period of 97 through 2008, Porsche used two different valve train designs. Those are broken down into the 5-chain, which is the earliest engine, and the 3-chain, which is the later engine. The 3-chain began with the 911 variants in 2002, and the 3-chain began with the Boxster variants in 2003. So there's a 1-year difference between the two of those just because the factory waited a little longer to incorporate the 3-chain, more simplified design with the Boxster derivatives. So to help you follow me as we talk about these two different versions of these engines, if I'm referring to early, I'm referring to that 5-chain engine. If I say a late, I'm referring to the 3-chain engine. Now, the difference between those two is the 5-chain engine had more parts. It didn't just have 2 extra timing chains, it also had a lot of other components that were removed later with a 3-chain engine. And those components, a lot of times, are responsible for the higher camshaft deviation values that we find in a 5-chain engine. Those components a lot of times will wear, like this particular component here, that is part of the variable valve timing system that you see here with these camshaft adjusters. So most people that are watching this video are going to have a vehicle that is either early or late, right? Because unless you're just watching this because you want to learn about the Porsche engine, you probably own one of these cars. So the 5-chain engine has that couple extra timing chains, one that goes from the intermediate shaft up to the crankshaft, then 2 master chains like this one that go out to each bank of camshafts and drive them, and then there's a 4th and a 5th chain that are found at the extremities of the valve train as a simplex chain on bank 1 and 2. So you'd have one here and then one on the other side as well. Those are your 4th and 5th timing chains. So the later engines, the 3 chains, all they have is that intermediate shaft drive chain, and then they have the 2 master chains that go out to bank 1 and out to bank 2, and they actually loop around both camshafts, okay? Where the 5-chain engine has those extra 2 chains that drive the exhaust camshaft from the intake camshaft, the 3-chain is missing that. The 3-chain is also missing this cam adjuster unit, and what takes the place of this camshaft adjuster unit is a vane cell adjuster that is only found on the intake camshaft, okay? So I'm just trying to help set the stage here for how many components the 3-chain is missing over the 5-chain. The 3-chain system is newer and is a lot better in its ability to adjust not just RPM, but also from a load perspective, okay? And this unit, as well as the chain adjuster here, are hydraulic adjusters. So the engine oil plays into this, okay? We're going to talk more about oil and that sort of thing as we move on, because with these engines, your oil just isn't there to protect and lubricate and cool things. It's also used as a hydraulic fluid to change your variable valve timing, and in some of the later engines that have variable valve timing plus, it also controls the valve lift, how far your valves are opening on the intake side of the cylinder head. So instead of going over the early 5-chain engines first, I'm going to go over the later 3-chain engines first, because those engines have a lot less things that will play into camshaft deviation values that are too great. Okay? We're going to go over what is a nominal value for this. We're going to go over what is my spec for a camshaft deviation, and we're going to go over what is out of spec a little bit later on. Those specifications change a little bit based on whether your engine is early or late. But from a wear perspective, there's only 3 things that the 3-chain engine will have happen to them that will basically create a camshaft deviation. Okay? There's a 4th one of those that's going to apply to both of these, and I'll go over that one now, because that one is mechanic error or human error. You can have camshaft deviation problems that are created by an incompetent person who is not well understanding of the way these engines are timed, the way these engines are built, or what components wear within the engine. If you have that scenario, that particular technician or mechanic, if you will end up creating your problem for you, because he may not use the proper tools to set valve timing, he may not use the proper tensioners or the right jigs or have any of the things in place while he's doing a repair procedure or an engine rebuild. If that happens, it's pretty easy to correct his problem. Put the engine to top dead center, follow the valve timing procedure that we have in our M9X engine rebuild video series, and it will show you how to correct that particular error that that person made. In those situations, you're not going to have any problems from a wear perspective or a mechanical perspective. Your problem is that technical error that was caused by the technician that more times than not didn't know what he didn't know. So if you have that 3-chain engine, your car is a 2002 996 or 997 variant, or it's a later Boxster Cayman from 2003 and on, then you're going to end up having the 3-chain engine. And there's only 3 things that are responsible for wear in a 3-chain engine that are of note. And basically, that one is going to be a worn IMS bearing. A lot of people use camshaft deviations to help them determine if they have an IMS bearing problem. The one thing that I will tell you is that from a 3-chain perspective, those engines would have, in most cases, the smaller M96 style IMS bearing, or of course the larger M97 bearing. You're not really going to see measurable camshaft deviations come from a worn IMS bearing unless that IMS bearing has completely failed at stage 4. In that situation, your engine's not running anymore. So in my estimation and in direct experience, using camshaft deviations to determine if you have IMS bearing problems is simply inadequate. If you have an IMS bearing problem that is driving a camshaft deviation issue, more than likely that bearing is going to fail and leave your engine out of service before you're going to note the camshaft deviations being out of range. So since your 3-chain engine uses this vane cell adjuster only on the intake camshaft, this has a range of adjustability of 40 degrees, okay? So this 40 degrees is constantly changing based on engine RPM, oil temperature, hydraulic pressure from the oil pressure inside the engine, as well as load. Okay, so this is constantly changing. If you're watching camshaft deviations with the proper type of tools, which we're going to go over a little later, you'll see that this is constantly changing, where if you compare it to a 5-chain, it's either on or it's off. A 5-chain has 25 degrees of deviation, and more than anything, it is dependent upon engine RPM. Okay? The 3-chain is constantly advancing or retarding the valve timing based on load, temperature, RPM, and those other things we spoke about. So we're seeing these engines now, if you have a camshaft deviation issue, it can be because this vane cell adjuster has started to get dirty inside, had dirty oil in it, whatever the case may be. So because of that, if we see a valve timing deviation issue, camshaft deviation issue from a 3-chain engine, the first thing I ask the customer is, how long since you changed the oil and what oil is in the engine? If he says it's been 8 or 10,000 miles, or I do the annual service, I tell him that's inadequate. You're seeing the results of that more than likely. Do a short service interval, change your oil to X, and don't ask me what I'm going to tell you for an oil. I'm not going to make this an oil video. And do a short service interval of about 500 to 600 miles and change that oil again. And let's see if these deviations drop. In most cases, they will. Okay? If they don't, this variable valve timing adjuster, vane cell adjuster, may be going bad. One way that they go bad is they end up with debris in them, or we're starting to see corrosive wear from the oil not being changed enough. Okay? There's another aspect of this where a very large bolt goes through the center of this and holds it to the camshaft. Early three-chain engines, mostly in 2002 996s, had a problem with this slipping on the intake camshaft. Okay? So let me grab a camshaft and I'm going to show you a little bit more about what I'm talking about. So I've grabbed an intake camshaft here from a three-chain engine. This would have been out of about a 2002 to 2003 996. And this retention bolt that I'm pointing to here is an item that must be replaced any time that it is removed. So we've seen a problem with factory engines, even during warranty periods with these engines. We've seen where this bolt would have inadequate torque and it would not have the proper amount of yield when it was tightened, and it would allow the position of this valve adjuster, the vane cell adjuster, to slightly move under load. So when you torqued it down, it would allow it to move a little bit. That will build in a false camshaft deviation issue. In that situation, you're going to have a retarded valve train event because it's going to always slip to the retarded side. Most all of your valve train deviations with both three-chain and five-chain engines that were not from a technician error or a human error are going to be in the negative or retarded type of scenario. Now the reason for that is because everything is always going to try to slip to the negative side. It's pretty hard for it to slip advanced, even if you over-rev an engine. Sometimes people think that will make it advanced, but a lot of times it still is going to retard because you're going to have all the valve train try to stay in one spot, and the crankshaft is going to zing a little bit higher, and you're going to have things stretch and move more toward the retarded side of things. So in these engines that have the vane cell adjuster issue, they will slip, and a lot of times they'll go like 90 degrees out of camshaft deviation, which is huge. And that can even be to the point where you end up bending valves because you have valves hitting pistons and things out of time. Other times they'll move about 10 degrees, and that's not enough to cause those problems, but it's enough to throw a check engine light, obviously, for a camshaft out of range. So this is the second of three things that lead to camshaft deviations in the three-chain engine specifically. Again, if you have a five-chain, don't pay attention to this. So the third thing that comes into play with the three-chain engines is these master timing chains. So these will go from the intermediate shaft out to and around the intake cam, out to and around the exhaust cam. These timing chains are not good quality. Okay, we've seen these 30, 40, 50,000 miles losing their tension. We've seen them stretch. We've seen them lose chain links. We've seen them snap in half. I've got a little bit of history with all of that stuff. Are most of the engines going to have that problem? No. But we normally see this in the earliest of 2002 996s. Those are the engines that lose timing chains more than any. Also, if you have a 2003 C4S or one of the more rare models, if you will, sometimes those engines were built in earlier 2002, even though they were an 2003 car, they have the same traits of the 03. So in those cases, this timing chain stretching will create a camshaft deviation issue. Now, a lot of times with that being said, you can pop the sump plate off, like we show in our What's in Your Oil video, and it will show you some of the things that come from a timing chain that's stretching or wearing. It is going to shed ferromagnetic debris because, of course, this timing chain is magnetic. Okay, so you're going to end up losing that debris, and a lot of times it's very small, kind of a blackish material, and if you've got a magnetic drain plug, it will coat the surface of your magnetic drain plug. That's the reason why every engine out there needs the LN Engineering magnetic drain plug that I developed back in 2007. All my engines get it, and your engine needs it too. That's a bit of a shameless plug for something that actually works. So in summary, if you've got a 3-chain engine, the 3 things that are probably going to need investigation from your side of things is going to be master timing chains going out to bank 1 and bank 2 from the intermediate shaft, the IMS bearing, which more than likely is not the case, or your vane cell adjuster that may have slipped in its position or has some wear or something going on inside it that is causing those camshaft deviations. These are the 3 most common things. Are there more things that can play into a 3-chain? Absolutely. I could go on all day long. But these are the 3 things that you want to look at. So now we're going to jump into the 5-chain. You're going to see just how many more things can be responsible for camshaft deviations in the early engines that had 5 timing chains, more wear pads, and more question marks. We're going to spend more time on the 5-chain issues, go over a few things about where the sensors are located, and kind of how those sensors report the deviations to the DME, or the engine control unit. So what I have here is a pair of these camshaft position sensors. You have one of these located in each cylinder head. The one here is for bank 2. This one is for bank 1. And what these do is they will report the position of each respective camshaft and report that back to the engine control unit as a deviation value. There's another important sensor that is part of the camshaft deviation reporting process. That is the crankshaft position sensor. Now this sensor looks to a 60-2 toothed reluctor wheel on the back of your flywheel for correct crankshaft position. This is how the ECU, or sometimes called the DME, engine control unit, knows the position of the crankshaft. This is basically what will synchronize the reporting from the crankshaft position to the ECU, so the crankshaft position can be used to calculate the camshaft positions. That calculation is what is used to create the camshaft deviation. So basically this sensor notices at what position the crankshaft is, and the 2 cam position sensors look to a reluctor wheel on each intake camshaft to report the position of the camshafts. Now this sensor is installed here in the crankcase. It looks to the flywheel inside the bell housing of the transmission for its reference point. These crankshaft position sensors are getting old and they're being responsible for reliability problems. If you have not replaced your crankshaft position sensor, there's one bolt that holds it in place. It takes a few minutes to do. It is a do-it-yourself job. If you have not replaced it, you need to. This is a component that will leave you on the side of the road. It will leave you with a lot of reliability issues. It will make the engine hard to start when it's hot. It'll make the engine shut off when it's hot. It'll make the tachometer jump around. It will create all kinds of issues. We're going to cover this in an upcoming RenVision technical video. So before we get started with all the other things about cam deviations, just want to clear up a little bit more about these camshaft position sensors. This is one of the cam position sensors that I had a little earlier. It actually looks to this tang that's on the intake camshaft for the actual position of this camshaft. Now on the 3-chain engine it's a little bit different than that, but we're not even going over it because it's really not a concern. Because 5-chain engines are the ones that have the biggest problems when it comes to chain cam deviations. So that being said, when people start getting a diagnostic trouble code for a camshaft sensor out of range, okay, the first thing they want to do is change the sensor. I'm with you on that a little bit because, hey, let's just throw the parts cannon at it, right? The diagnostic code came up and said something about a sensor, okay? But pay close attention to what it says about the sensor, okay? It doesn't say anything about short to ground or shorted or anything like that. It says sensor out of range. That is key because what that code is reporting is that what this sensor is reading is out of range. That would be the camshaft position being out of range. So if you just throw the parts cannon at it, you go to whatever your friendly local auto parts store may be, Flaps as we call it, then they're going to sell you a sensor. You're going to put it in and think you solved the problem. You're going to drive the car a few miles and it's going to come back with the same diagnostic trouble code, sensor out of range. And then you're going to say, oh crap, what's going on here? Did I get a bad sensor? And at the end of the day, this wasn't your problem anyway. You know, do these go bad? Yes. They're 20 years old now, a lot of them are in the 5-chain engines. So they do go bad. And yes, I'm with you. I would probably change it as well, even though I don't like to throw the parts cannon at it. The first thing that I would do is I would buy a Durametric tool, okay? We're not sponsored by Durametric or anything like that, but it is a good tool for enthusiasts and professionals alike that work with this era of Porsche. It's just a fact. It is, to me, the tool that sets the standard for the enthusiast. A lot of shops only use a Durametric. If they don't see just Porsches, if they see a little bit of everything import, they will use the Pro version of Durametric, and it does everything they need to do outside of programming keys, programming some things like that. Sometimes you can't do airbag stuff with it. There are a few things it will not do for a professional, okay? You can't upload new ECU files with a Durametric, okay? Not out of the box anyway. So with that being said, a Durametric would be a great tool to do an onboard diagnostics test with. You plug it in, you go down and select camshaft deviation 1 and 2, you look at nominal values, and you pay attention to where the camshaft positions are. That's another whole video, okay? But right now I'm trying to tell you, before you go buy this sensor, you need a Durametric anyway. Just go buy it and see what your camshaft deviations are, okay? If they're above 6 degrees, which is the factory allowable for camshaft deviation, then you have a problem. It is out of tolerance. My tolerance for that is 4 degrees, okay? So I don't want to do anything with an engine that's got beyond 4 degrees from a repair perspective. You know, if it's beyond that, I have my customers sign waivers and understand that it's almost to the point where we're going to have to go in and change these wear pads on the 5-chain, because this is what's responsible for those big camshaft deviations in most cases, which we're about to go over this in detail. But again, that code says camshaft position sensor out of range. Usually that's not the sensor. That's the fact that the camshaft position is further out in respect to the crankshaft position than the ECU has for an allowable. It sets that diagnostic trouble code and it alerts you that you have a problem. Now you have to do something about it. So much like I did a little earlier in this video on the 3-chain topic, I'm going to touch on a couple of other things that can also be considerations for out of specification camshaft deviations for the 5-chain. Now keep in mind, we can also have some tolerance stack up, right? We can have several things that have some wear on them, that have a little bit of wear on them, that when added together as an equation end up with a sum of deviation, okay? Good example, you could have a little bit of wear from a partially failing IMS bearing, okay? At this point in time, this bearing's 20 years old. If you've got a 5-chain engine, you need to take this bearing and retrofit it, period. That takes that out of the equation. Second, you may have your main master timing chain rails starting to wear. Now again, let's keep in mind what these do. These are pretty much the same on the 5-chain and the 3-chain, a little bit different physical design of them because one is made to support the chain differently than the other, but they still play the same role. These have a little bit of play as far as wear goes in the engine, and they play into this just a little bit. So let's say you got a little bit of wear from the IMS bearing, a little bit of wear from these chain rails, you're getting more of a camshaft deviation, okay? Then we have the drive chain for the intermediate shaft. This one is an inverted tooth. It can also be a duplex style on the 5-chain engine, since that would be an early one. This chain, if it starts to stretch or wear a little bit, or if its wear pads start to go bad, it will also give you a little bit of deviation. Now what's unique about this one is the fact that this one will play into the deviations on both banks equally. So if this chain starts to wear, okay, and this one does have some wear on it, I can tell by how much it deflects. That's one way we can grade these, is how much that chain deflects, and I've actually got a measurement for that. But as the chain wears, it gets more deflection, it gets more wear internally, and you'll pick up a little bit of a camshaft deviation. We've seen these chains fail. We've seen them stretch to the point where you have high cam deviations. Now, what's interesting about this is it's going to pretty much cause the same amount of deviation on both banks equally, because this is driving the intermediate shaft, and the intermediate shaft drives your camshafts, both on the 3-chain and the 5-chain. Okay, so if this chain starts to wear, or if the wear pads that support it start to wear, you're going to end up with higher camshaft deviations on both banks equally. But there are some things further out in the valve train that can make that wear become worse on bank 1 or worse on bank 2. But if you see an engine that's got like 2 degrees or 3 degrees of retarded type valve deviation, camshaft deviation, negative numbers that is, then usually this chain is responsible for that, okay? But now, the most important thing, and the thing that has brought almost all of you to this video with high camshaft deviation values from your 5-chain engine, are these particular wear pads located here and here on the camshaft adjuster of only the 5-chain engines. These things wear, and they cause big camshaft deviations that are causing big problems for engines. This is fairly simple to address, and we're going to go over what these deviations are and some of the things you need to do before you jump into repairing an engine that has worn chain guides. So we've talked a bit about the camshaft deviation, what it is. Basically, it's the difference between the crankshaft position and the camshaft positions on bank 1 or bank 2 measured in degrees, okay? We talked about what recognizes that being the camshaft position sensor, what it looks to on the camshaft, and now we're going to talk about the 5-chain specifically and what plays into those big camshaft deviations. Now, some of you are going to watch this video because you found debris in the oil that was the hard brown plastic, or sometimes a little bit dark brown plastic, and you're going to wonder where that came from. Well, that, of course, is known to come from these chain guides, okay, that are located on what I call the 4th and 5th chains, which are a simplex chain that is found connecting the intake and exhaust cams in all the 5-chain engines. And again, that's up to 2001, actually through 2001 in the 996, and up to and through 2002 in the 986, both by base model and S model. So with these things being said, now we have to talk about how to avoid this wear from occurring, because we've already shown that these have wear. We've talked about the fact that the factory has made differences in the chain guide material, both for the main timing chain guides as well as these smaller ones for the 4th and 5th chains. And those have been revised several times, and they do not cause any problems today. I've got engines that have many, many miles on them. We've pulled them apart and looked at different things from the track or whatever. Using good oil, keeping it serviced is a key to this, obviously, but the chain material, the guide material the factory has gone to is a lot better than what was in the original engine, okay? So if you're coming here because you found that in your oil, then there's a good chance that you're going to end up having a high camshaft deviation value when you buy that durometric test system and you check your camshaft deviation values with the engine hot and at idle. Okay, that's when you want to check that. You can check it at other points and it can give you some other parameters, but for a 5-chain engine at idle with the air conditioning turned off, you're going to see your biggest differences in crankshaft and camshaft deviation. So, everybody wants to know what they can do to prevent this. Well, if we would have talked in this video series 20 years ago, what I could have told you then and what I would have told you then would have given you a much better chance of the necessity of you watching this video today, because I would have told you to throw the owner's manual away in regard to service. That's from an oil perspective and a service interval perspective. I would tell you to take those pages and rip them out and burn them and replace them with some other pages that I give to my engine customers that buy one of my engines. That would have probably saved us from being here. At the end of the day, that didn't happen. We didn't know what we didn't know, and nobody did. Also, the fact of the matter is that the factory revised these materials because these materials were inadequate. So if you see a factory change, then it's a significant thing that leads to that. Revisions cost a lot of money, they cost a lot of hassles. They're only done if there's a real good reason to do so. So when they change the material, that is admission that there's a problem with said material. And either it doesn't like the oil, doesn't like the service interval, it doesn't like the load, or any of these things, basically all of the above. So if you have a 5-chain engine, you have wear on these chain guides. These 4 chain guides we're talking about here, located between the intake and exhaust cams on both banks. You're going to have wear there. When you do your diagnostic, even if your car has 18,000 miles on it, you're going to find this out of range, okay? Case in point, I had a customer with a 2000 996. He's local to me. The car had 16,000 miles on it. He purchased the car for a premium because it had low mileage, which, by the way, is a mistake. And immediately he wanted to address the infamous IMS bearing. And he did not take me very seriously when I said, I have to pre-qualify your engine to make sure it is healthy enough to see my IMS solution to be installed. He's like, what are you talking about? It's got low mileage. There's no way it can have any mechanical problems. And it passed a pre-purchase inspection carried out by a gold certified Porsche technician. I said, okay, well, we're still playing the game my way. You got to bring the car by. It'll only take me 10 minutes to do one part of the pre-qualification for this engine that is the most important for me to give it a green light or a red light for pre-qualification. So he shows up. I take out the AutoLogic tool, which is the easiest one for us to just go plug up in the parking lot. It's a pro-level tool. Plug it in. Camshaft deviation was out 13 degrees on that car. Engine had never been out of it. It was a one-owner car. But the problem with that car is it more than likely sat around and probably had maybe 3 oil changes at most in the amount of time that it was in service. So that nasty old corrosion-filled oil with all this nasty stuff in it, fuel intrusion, everything else, condensation, had sat there and it had worked on this factory material. I told him, we cannot do the IMS solution installation. Your engine is disqualified. He says, what in the hell are you talking about? How is that possible at this mileage point? This engine shouldn't have any wear on it. I said, well, if I pull these wear guides out and they're not worn about it, at least as bad as this one is a good example, I'll do the job for free. If not, you pay me full price. He accepted my deal, and when I pulled them apart, they were worn worse than this one by far, and it proved my point. Put it back together, my deviations were well within 2 degrees at worst. Most of the time they were like 3/4 of a degree, which is very good, and we were able to do the rest of the preventative work. So you cannot grade an engine based on how well it was serviced, nor can you base it on how low the mileage is. Because we've learned that this problem, it just happens to pretty much every one of the engines that have a 5-chain arrangement and has the factory material. It's a materials composition problem, it's an oil service problem, it's a service interval problem, it is also a driving style problem. Because more than likely that car that had those low miles on it was babied to the point where it had never been driven hard. Good example. Whenever I do one of these preventative packages, I look at the operating hours that the engine control unit has logged. It's almost like a piece of equipment or a tractor. It has an hour meter, basically, inside the DME that tells us how many hours that engine is operated. I took the mileage on the car, divided the hours into that, and figured out that this car was only driven about 25 miles per hour average its entire life. So that told me that the car was probably driven in the city somewhere. Come to find out, the guy lived in Buckhead in Atlanta, and he probably just drove it on surface streets, never even got it on the highway. So a good example is we typically see 30 miles per hour, 30 to 32 miles per hour average when we do that math on a car that is driven on open highways and sees quite a bit of time at cruise speed and maybe a little bit of track work. Cars that see nothing but track work will have like a 40 mile per hour average, 40 or even 50 over that amount of time. But cars that are only driven on surface streets, 23 to 25 miles per hour average when you start talking about the amount of operating hours and the amount of mileage with that equation being performed. So, now that we've talked about what's leading into this and the fact that you are not going to prevent this, okay? I'm going to go ahead and paint a target on my back for all the fearmonger guys out there to say Jake is full of it, there's no way this is going to happen to my car. Well, I challenge each and every one of you to come here and perform the job of extracting engines from these cars and perform the job of tearing those down and documenting and evaluating those engines. And you also will see that this is a problem that every one of the 5-chain engines either have or will have in the future. And that is really because of this material, oil service intervals, oil choice, and driving style. So if you have a 5-chain engine and you end up with massive camshaft deviations of 20 plus degrees, usually around 23 to 25 degrees, what is going to be responsible for that is a failure of the hydraulic chain adjuster unit. This entire unit will fail. It has seals inside of it, not changing the oil frequently enough, using the wrong oil, overheated oil, all of those things, as well as time in service and mileage, lead to this hydraulic unit failing. So if you end up in a scenario where you have 20 to 25 degrees of camshaft deviation, you're going to end up needing to replace this unit. Of course, it's going to work just like it does when you change the wear pads. You're just going to end up changing the entire hydraulic unit. I would also recommend replacing the electronic solenoid that actuates it. And sometimes even that electronic solenoid will be responsible for that 25 degrees. So you definitely want to make sure that you diagnose this, make sure you don't have an electrical problem, electronic problem, and you want to make sure that your issue is a hydraulic problem before you replace the entire unit. So while we're on that topic, everybody wants to know prevention. How do I prevent it? How do I prevent it? We're 20 years too late to prevent it. Basically, at this point, I want to talk about absolutes, okay? Everybody wants to hear an absolute. What is the one thing I can do? What is the one thing that causes this? What is the one thing, the one thing, the one thing? It's an equation. I'll say that over and over again about everything related to these engines in most cases. That being said, when you plug in your durometric system, you may find that your bank 1 deviation is higher than bank 2. You may find that bank 2 is higher than bank 1. You may find that both of them are wearing together, okay? There is no absolutes when it comes to this. The only thing that stays the same is everything constantly is a variable. So yours may just be that way. So what are some of the things that lead to that? One is mechanical. It's never perfect. Some of these chain adjuster units move more than others do. Okay? Sometimes one side of the engine has higher oil pressure than the other side. Is that supposed to be that way? No, but we found that there are some things inside the engine where some of the oil galleries sometimes, especially in the cylinder heads, will not get as much oil flow up into the chain adjuster. We've seen engines that actually had holes in the head casting and let some of the oil bleed out of the casting and not even go into the chain adjuster unit. That one went to 4 different dealerships and 3 other shops with no diagnostic being performed correctly before we figured it out. So there's weird things that we see at our level that other people don't get to see. And that basically means there are no absolutes. So if you get the durometric system and you're able to look at your camshaft deviations, don't worry that much about why is this happening, blah, blah, blah. You're going to have to take it apart, look at your chain guides, make sure the chain adjusters are in good condition, make sure that the reluctor wheel on the camshaft actually, which is another variable, make sure it's trying not to come loose. We've seen these try to work loose before, especially on the 3-chain engines. They're actually on the other end of the camshaft, and we've seen those be off from the factory. I've seen engines that had 10 degrees of deviation from the factory, even though the mechanical cam timing was perfect, because this reluctor wheel was not put on in the proper location at the factory. So nothing ever ceases to amaze us with these engines. Nothing is absolute. You must question every single thing. You must assume nothing and quantify everything. That's everything about engine building and everything about diagnostics when it comes to a problem like this. You've got to pay close attention. You've got to use common sense, okay? So this is certainly a very repairable scenario. This is not hard to replace these components, and it's not hard to get the camshaft deviations back where they belong. We've been doing this repair for many years. Now let's go over that. So we've discussed all the things leading up to this, and really the task at hand is going to be replacing the chain guides that you see here and here on this camshaft adjuster unit. Now, we got a little bit of a training aid that we're going to use to roughly show you how to do this. This is not going to be a video that is instructional about how to do this job. All I want to do is stimulate thought on your side, show you a couple of the things that you need to know from specialty knowledge, and talk about a couple of tools you need to do this. So there may be a desire for many of you to pay for a video that shows you step by step how to do this. We've not shot that video yet, so if it's something that you would like to see and you would be a paid member of RenVision to be able to be granted access to that, sound off in the comments and let us know. These videos take a lot of time, and something like that where we're sharing very specific information and a lot of that being proprietary knowledge, we were going to be compensated for that. So I'm just trying to stimulate your thought process, show you the basics of what you need to do to carry out a very straightforward and simple process using the right tools. So we're going to step over here to our training aid, and I'm going to show you the basics of replacing these chain guides. Now, first off, I have the engine out of the car. I highly recommend that you do the same. If your car is a Boxster, either an S or a base, there is a good possibility you could do this in the car. It is going to fight you, you can't do as good of a job, and things are going to take longer than they will if you just bite the bullet and pull the engine out of the car. If you have a 911 variant, it is very difficult to do this in the car, and I certainly would suggest that you remove the engine. When you have the engine out of the car, take advantage of easier access to IMS bearing, clutch, flywheel, air oil separator, water pump, all the other things that make these cars have small issues that you need to deal with. Even the coolant tank can be replaced while the engine's out of the car. So bite the bullet and do it. That's my recommendation, okay? So, first off, before you do anything mechanical with the internals of these engines from a repair perspective, you want to take your crankshaft position and lock it at TDC. Now, TDC is indicated as basically the teardrop here on the crankshaft pulley, and when the teardrop here aligns with the boss in the crankcase for the 8mm pin to go through and lock the crankshaft, you also have this notch align with the TDC mark on the crankshaft, or OT, meaning on top, okay, on the crankcase. So that will align over on the bank 2 side of the crankcase, while this aligns with the locking boss on the bank 2 side of the crankcase, okay? You want to lock the crank at TDC, and you want to leave it there for the duration of this process until you're ready to do your camshaft timing upon reinstallation of all your new components. We're going to start off with bank 1. You can start with bank 2, whichever side you want to start with. No big deal. We're going to show you bank 1 because we got our training jig that's handy right here at the Knowledge Group training facility. So the first thing you're going to do is remove your scavenge pump, okay? And when you try to remove this scavenge pump, if you're doing this job in the car, you will quickly learn why I told you to pull the engine out of the car if it is a 911 variant. Removing this scavenge pump in the car can be done, but it is quite a chore. I recommend not going through that experience. Bite the bullet, drop the engine, and take advantage of a much simpler scenario. Once that is removed, okay, we are going to install, you're going to see back here when I pull the cam cover off, I've installed a jig that holds the camshafts in position. Now this is not bolted on, it's just for demonstration purposes only, okay? and you want to bolt this jig on that holds the back of your camshafts in place, because if you don't do that, you end up in a scenario where the cam cover is removed and there's nothing to hold your camshafts in place except for this tool that you've just put on, okay? Once that tool is in place, the cam cover is removed, and then you can fit this bridge, okay? You can't fit this bridge until the camshaft cover is removed, okay? So all of these pieces, as well as a valve timing tool, is included in the valve timing set from BAUM Tools, B-A-U-M Tools. Now, we've had this one for many years, and their stuff holds up really well. There's some knockoffs of the stuff, but it's just not as good a quality. We use the BAUM stuff, or we made our own over the years. At the end of the day, they sell the cam timing toolkit that you need to do this job correctly. I highly recommend that you don't buy tools off eBay. You don't buy things that are not proven, because they could cause you to have camshaft deviation issues upon reinstallation simply because those tools are incorrect. So, with this bridge fitted, then we can remove the holding tool here from the rear. Now, this holding tool in the rear was only so we could pull the camshaft cover off to facilitate fitting the bridge here in the back. Now, what you have to understand is the camshaft cover actually holds some of the journal surfaces that hold the cams in. So the reason you have to do this is because once this is removed, there's nothing to hold the aft portion of this cam in place on either the intake or the exhaust. And then you have all sorts of things going on there that you don't want to deal with, okay? So once that's off and you have this jig put into place, the next thing you can do is go ahead and pull your chain tensioner, okay? It's 32 millimeter, located on the bottom of bank 1 cylinder head, or located on the top of bank 2 cylinder head. You're going to remove this, and that is going to put some slack in the timing chain, okay? Once the slack is in the timing chain, then you can go ahead and remove the 4 bolts on the exhaust cam sprocket that you see here. You can remove the 5 millimeter Allen head bolts that hold the camshaft cover, or camshaft caps in place on the intake and the exhaust, as well as the 3 bolts that are 5 millimeter Allen head that also hold the chain adjuster in, okay? Now keep in mind, all this stuff is going to be reset when it goes back together again. I've seen people mark a bunch of stuff and do all kinds of things. You don't have to do that right now. There's only one part I'm going to show you a little bit later on that you need to mark for allocation. And that's just going to be when you go to separate these 2 camshafts from the chain adjuster unit. There's 2 markings we're going to put on the chains to simplify that going back together, okay? So at the end of the day, chain adjuster unit, or chain tensioner unit comes out from the bottom here. Exhaust cam sprocket comes off, chain adjuster unit comes out. You pull this bridge off the rear, and then you're able to remove all of this as a unit. It all comes out just like this once you've got those pieces off. So another tool that you're going to need is a tool that also is available from BAUM or also from Porsche, and it is made to collapse or compress the hydraulic chain adjuster unit to allow you to separate the simplex chain from the adjuster with the wear pads and all that sort of thing. So one of these is gold, one of these is black. One has a right-hand thread, one has a left-hand thread. Some engines need a right, some engines need a left, based on the year model or if the chain adjuster unit has been replaced over the years or whatever the case may be. You can look at the threads in the lowermost portion of the chain adjuster unit and see if they are right-hand or left-hand threads, okay? If they're right-hand threads, you can actually have a pretty good opportunity to end up making your own one of these from whatever you can find locally. If it's left-hand thread, like the black one is here, well, it's going to be kind of hard to find left-hand thread stock, even though I've been able to buy it at McMaster-Carr, Granger, some places like that, take a couple of nuts and make one of these. At the end of the day, it's a cheap tool that you can buy from BAUM along with the rest of your tools. So before we go into that, I want to also bring up our focus on M9X engine rebuild series, okay? This is a 15-hour video series that is step-by-step with everything you need to know to be either a professional or an enthusiast engine builder for a Porsche M9X engine. What is particular about this is it has a supplemental 5-chain section in the book as well as the DVD. And this book is a supplemental book. This is an optional book. It's the workbook that was comprised from the transcripts and the photos from the DVD series. And we took a lot of time to put this together. It's about 250 pages. It's full color. It is an awesome publication that I'm very proud to have my name on the cover of. And this section talks all about the 5-chain engine, okay? Goes over what the 5-chain engine was in, goes over this procedure, goes over the special tools, and all of that. Now, this is not particularly just for the job of doing this 5-chain chain guide replacement. This is for rebuilding an engine. However, after about page 2 here, you can pick up in this workbook and the DVD that goes along with it. They're only available together, and you'll be able to use this to replace the chain guides in the engine. Okay, goes over which cams go where, goes over lifters, goes over all of this stuff. Everything that this video today is lacking is made up for in explicit detail here in my workbook. Okay, you can buy that from theknowledgegroup.com. You can also buy it from Pelican Parts. You can buy it from LN Engineering and a lot of other trusted sources in the Porsche engine rebuilding world. Okay, so if your engine is original and has not been apart, you're going to see that it has 2 discolored links on the timing chain, on the simplex chain. One is here and one is here. I've marked these in red. There's also a small dot on each camshaft that I've also indicated in red that you can see here. This is the only allocation that you really need to mark. The dots are also going to end up being, they're indented in the camshaft. There's kind of an embossment there that you can see, but I mark them red so it's easier for me to notate them later on and easier for you to see them here. And we do a lot of that in the workbook and the video as well. Everything is explicitly in color and great detail. Takes a lot for 15 hours of step by step, right? But at the end of the day, you want to do that because this is going to help us allocate and mark our new timing chains. We're going to replace these simplex chains. They are small, they wear, they break. We've seen that happen before, so we want to replace those. The reason why we've marked ours is because the replacement chains a lot of times do not have the discolored links. So then you're kind of, especially if you throw your old ones away, which you never want to do till the job's done, you're out to lunch and you've got to call me up or whatever and try to look in the Bentley manual or one of the manuals that's not clear about that. My workbook is very clear about that. My video is extremely clear about that, where these marks are, how to count them out, and all that sort of thing in case you did throw your chains away. So with that marked, everything's allocated. I've got a 5mm Allen here. I've got my right-hand threaded tool in this particular chain adjuster. And all I'm going to do is relax this, okay? I don't want to go crazy and be Goliath with this. I just want to compress it to the point where it starts to get tight, okay? And then once it gets tight, it allows me to pull all of this apart and access these chain guides. Okay, that's about as far as I want to go with that. You can over-tighten it, which we don't want to do. All right, now I'm going to pop everything apart. All right, so I'm just going to pull this apart. It's easy to do with everything compressed here. Once I've got the camshafts out of the way, then I'm going to go ahead and take the simplex chain and pull it out of the way. And then what I want to show you, and of course this all just came off of an engine. None of it's been cleaned up. That's why it's still oily. Look how worn these are, okay? So this is the top side. You see the wear that's on it. I've got it popped loose. Has a little O-ring under there, okay? And then now let's look at the bottom side. The bottom side looks really good. That bottom side has hardly any wear on it. So, you know, some of these are worn on the top side, some are worn on the bottom side, some are like worn almost all the way through on both. I've seen these wear completely through, so there's no guide left. The guide is found in the oil completely in the sump, and it wears into the metal here. So after we've marked these discolored links, we're going to transfer those marks over to our replacement new chains. You want to replace these chains. They are cheap. You also are going to buy a small kit of these parts. Porsche sells the new wear pads as a pair, so you'll have to have 2 pair for the engine, basically. So 1 pair does 1 bank of cams. And once you've got that, clean everything up nice and well. Obviously, cleanliness is next to godliness. You want to make sure that you don't have any green type material sticking out of this chain adjuster, okay? The inside of the chain adjuster is some green material, and that can actually start to rupture and fail. So if you find like this mint green type of material in the oil or in the sump or sticking out of here, that tells you that you've got a chain adjuster that is starting to fail, okay? Now, there is another color of green that is inside of here. This is something else you might find in your oil at some point. We have a video on what you find in your oil. That's another one of the things you can find in your oil that would be a soft type of rubber, okay? So that is only going to happen from a 5-chain engine. It's the only thing that has that is a 5-chain engine, okay? So once everything's cleaned up, you're going to reassemble your camshafts. You're going to align the dots that you put on the camshafts with the discolored links that you've transferred the markings over from onto your new chains. You're going to reassemble everything. You're going to back off this chain adjuster tool, and that's going to put tension back on the cams just enough so you can put them back in the engine. You just want to put enough tension on them so they're not going to flop around and try to fall apart. If you leave this completely compressed, it ends up being kind of a cluster when you go to put it on the engine because they want to jump out of the chain links and all that sort of thing. So back it off just enough that you don't have a problem with the unit trying to stay together, okay? So now we're going to go back over to our jig engine and talk about what it's going to take to put that unit back into the engine. So I've got the assembly ready to go back in. You can see I put just enough tension on it that things are not trying to fall apart. I'm going to simulate sticking this in place, okay? Then we're going to set that aside. At this point in time, we would go ahead and we would put our camshaft caps back on. We would tighten the bridge back up, get that in place, and then we're going to go through a scenario of the camshaft timing, which uses this particular tool here that also comes in the kit from Baum. And we're going to put on the exhaust cam sprocket and all that sort of thing, and we're going to use our special tool like this one, and we're going to release the load from that tensioner unit. Once that is done, the camshaft timing can then be set correctly. We're going to put this bridge back on the rear, remove this bridge, and then we're going to end up putting the camshaft cover, back on. Then we're going to put the scavenge pump back in. Then we're going to finish the job by unlocking the crankshaft pulley. And somewhere along the line, you've put the hydraulic tensioner unit back in for the chain tensioner, okay? That's just a rough roundabout way to do it. Again, we go over exactly how to do this in the Focus on M9X Engine Rebuild video and workbook. We're also going to shoot another video potentially that shows exactly how to do this particular job and nothing else. Not from a rebuild perspective, but from a repair perspective, okay? Just trying to familiarize you with this. This is not hard to do. You just follow the instructions in the workshop manual, follow the video series, follow my workbook, and use common sense. If you mark things as you take them apart, you can put them right back on the way they were. The biggest challenge is understanding the camshaft timing and the order of assembly as well as the order of disassembly. When the chain tensioner goes back in, when you release things, all that. Not hard to do for a professional or an enthusiast, okay? A lot of enthusiasts are doing this work. We're seeing that. Okay, so we're going to go back to the workbench. We're going to close out this video, help you guys understand a couple more things so you understand more about camshaft deviations and how to fix them. So I hope this instructional video has helped you understand what camshaft deviation is and some of the factors that play into it, as well as how to address it. Most people who watch this are, of course, going to have that 5-chain engine with those infamous chain wear pads that are going to end up wearing and create those big camshaft deviations that are going to require some intervention. So if you're one of those people, I don't want you to be afraid to tackle the job yourself. If you are a professional technician, maybe you don't work on Porsches every day, I also don't want you to be afraid of this job. It is a job that would be very wise for you to invest in the tools and the knowledge to do, because more and more cars are going to need this type of job done. This is not an engine rebuild problem. This is a problem that can be done from a rebuild perspective. If you have the engine apart, obviously, it's also a job that can be done as a standalone repair if the rest of the engine is healthy. Most engines are going to have that scenario unfold. Camshaft deviation problems are not an absolute downer to the engine from a global perspective. You're not going to have to perform a rebuild because of this problem unless you drive the car to death, meaning you keep on having camshaft deviation symptoms, you know you have a problem, you've got constant check engine lights, whatever the case may be, you avoid taking action when you found things in the oil, and you wear these chain guides to the point where they snap, or they wear completely through and into the chain adjuster. When that happens, it creates a lot of ferromagnetic wear debris. That wear debris takes out the rest of the internals of the engine as a global instance, okay? So again, this has not been a step-by-step tutorial. It's not meant to be a repair procedure. This is a basic general overview of what camshaft deviations are, why they occur, what factors into them, and roughly how to repair them if you have a 5-chain engine. So again, the Focus on M9X engine assembly is available as a standalone DVD. It's also available with an optional workbook that goes along with it. The workbook is not sold separately. The two are designed to act as a study group. So if you found this technical video informative, go ahead and subscribe to our channel. That's what helps keep it going. And also find us on Facebook and like both RenVision and the Knowledge Group. Go on over to theknowledgegroup.com, purchase your copy of the video and the workbook if you want to tackle this job and many others associated with engine rebuilds. You can also pick this up at LN Engineering, Pelican Parts, and other fine establishments in the Porsche engine industry.